The first time Henry leaned over the fence, I thought it was nothing. Just a nosy neighbor with too much time. But then he said the words that split my life open. Words that made every smile from Claire, every kiss, every excuse, feel like a script. I told myself it was paranoia. Until her phone lit up. Until the lies spread through friends, neighbors, even family. And when the truth finally surfaced, it wasn't just betrayal, it was strategy. A plan so precise, so cold, it left me questioning everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the woman I married. You won't believe what she was hiding in plain sight. The first time Henry leaned over the fence and said he needed to talk, I didn't think much of it. He was one of those neighbors who seemed to always know too much, the kind who spent more time watching the neighborhood than living in it. I'd seen him pruning his roses with the same intensity that a surgeon might apply to an operation, always peering up now and then as if cataloging movements on the street. I was cutting back the hedge between our yards when he stepped closer and lowered his voice. "Michael," he said, "I don't want to stir trouble, but I think your wife is hiding something from you." It was a strange thing to say, and the way he said it, too calm, too measured, immediately rubbed me the wrong way. I looked up from the clippers and studied his face. Nothing dramatic about him. No hint of malice. No grin of satisfaction. Just concern. Real or feigned, I couldn't tell. "My wife?" I asked, arching an eyebrow. "You mean she isn't being honest with me?" Henry hesitated. "I didn't say that. But that's what you meant," I said plainly. He exhaled and looked down at his shoes before meeting my eyes again. "You should just pay attention. People aren't always what they seem." That should have been the end of it. I should have shrugged it off. But the words, vague and unsettling, stayed with me like a splinter under the skin. I told myself Henry was just a lonely man with too much time on his hands. Maybe he watched too many crime shows. Still, the thought lingered. That evening, I didn't tell Claire about Henry's comment. There didn't seem to be a need. We had been married 12 years. She was the kind of woman who still left handwritten notes in my lunch bag when she packed it. Little things like, "Hope your morning's not too dull. Love you." But that night, as I stood in the kitchen pouring a glass of water, I noticed something. Claire's phone buzzed once. She was in the living room, curled up with her book. The message flashed briefly on the screen, just a name I didn't recognize and a single heart emoji. It was easy to dismiss. People have friends. People send emojis. But now, Henry's words were wedged somewhere deeper. Over the next week, I began to notice more. She was going out more frequently, yoga classes, drinks with old college friends, quick errands that took hours. Always with a smile, always with a kiss on the cheek before leaving. I started asking subtle questions. How was class? Who'd she meet for lunch? The answers came easily. Too easily. They had the polished ring of memorized lines. I wasn't looking to catch her in a lie. Not yet. I wasn't even suspicious enough to snoop. But I started paying attention, like Henry suggested. I watched, I listened. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, I ran into Grace, our neighbor from the other end of the street, while picking up groceries. She was unusually tense when I mentioned Claire. She said she'd seen her downtown, but paused just a little too long when I asked who she was with. "I don't want to say something that's not my place," Grace finally said, glancing at the ground. "But you know, sometimes women go through phases." Phases? I wanted to ask what she meant, but her tone made it clear she'd already said too much. When I got home, I sat in my car for a full 10 minutes before going inside. Claire was there, humming softly, cooking dinner like nothing in the world was out of place. But something was. That night, I stood by our bedroom window, looking out across the fence toward Henry's house. His porch light was on. He was standing at the window, not looking at me, not waving, just staring out into the quiet street. And for the first time, I realized that whatever Henry had seen, whatever made him step over that line and say those words to me, it wasn't just idle gossip. Something had happened. Something that started with a glance from a window across the fence. Silence has a weight to it. It builds slowly, like water rising in a glass, until one day it spills over and you wonder how you didn't see it happening. That's what our house started to feel like. Quiet, but not peaceful. Claire was still doing everything right, smiling, cooking, checking in on my day. But her words felt hollow, her gestures rehearsed. After what Henry said over the fence, I tried to put it out of my mind. But I couldn't. Not when her phone buzzed with unfamiliar names. Not when she started volunteering on Saturdays at an animal shelter she never mentioned before. I didn't ask about it directly. I just listened more, observed. I wasn't suspicious enough to pry. Not yet. But something had shifted. That weekend I visited my sister, Elaine. We'd never been especially close, but she was perceptive, no nonsense, and rarely wrong about people. Do you think she's hiding something? Elaine asked after I vaguely mentioned Claire's distant behavior. Maybe. Then don't confront her. Talk to the people around her. Friends slip up more than liars do. It made sense, and I took her advice. The next morning, I drove to a cafe where Claire often met her friend Danielle. I stayed in the car just to see if they actually met. Danielle came out alone after 20 minutes. I got out and called her over. She smiled, surprised. Michael, everything okay? I smiled back. Claire said you two met for brunch last weekend. Her expression changed. We haven't met in over a month. That alone wasn't damning, but it chipped at something. I went by Claire's office on Monday and spotted Martha, one of her coworkers. I waved her down. She's still working full days? I asked. Claire. Martha looked puzzled. She's been leaving early every Friday for the past few weeks. Said it was personal time. Claire had told me she worked late on Fridays. She came home like she always did, calm, relaxed, never flustered. When I got home that evening, I watched her more closely. She talked about the shelter again, mentioned a new foster puppy, even gave it a name. She smiled as she told me the story, but it didn't feel like the truth. I nodded. Sounds cute. That night, I lay awake, her breathing steady beside me. I didn't sleep. The next day, I called her mother. We hadn't spoken in months. After a few minutes of polite conversation, I asked, Has Claire talked to you lately? About us? She mentioned she's been reevaluating some things, her mother said carefully. She feels like you're pulling away. That struck me. Claire was setting the stage, preparing her version of the story before I even knew there was one. I started connecting dots. A neighbor across the street mentioned seeing Claire on Fridays getting into a car that wasn't mine, same time every week. One of her college friends said she'd seemed distracted, maybe conflicted. I even called the animal shelter. The volunteer coordinator said Claire hadn't been around in weeks. Whatever was happening, it was quiet, careful, designed not to leave a trail. But people talk, and they leave gaps in their stories. By Thursday, I found myself in the yard again, raking leaves that didn't need raking. Henry appeared. He didn't say much, just stood on his side of the fence and watched me. You still watching? He asked. I looked up. Yeah, I am now. He nodded once. Then you'll see it soon. I never liked snooping. Never saw the point of it. I've always believed that if you needed to spy on your spouse, the marriage was already broken. But this wasn't about suspicion anymore. It was about confirmation. And strangely, I didn't feel anxious. I felt composed. Focused. Friday came, and I told Claire I'd be working late. She smiled, kissed me, said, Don't overdo it. Then she left before I did. As usual, same time. Same purse. Same vague excuse. I waited 15 minutes, then left through the back. Drove to the far end of the neighborhood and parked behind a cluster of hedges across from the main road. From there, I had a clear view of the intersection. At exactly 5:47, a silver sedan pulled up. Claire walked down the block and got in without hesitation. The driver didn't get out. She didn't look around. It was too smooth, too practiced. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. That car wasn't from work. And Claire never mentioned a friend who drove a silver sedan with out-of-state plates. I sat there, watching the road long after they disappeared. The next day, I visited Tom, an old friend of mine who worked in the same general industry as Claire. I didn't tell him everything, just asked if he knew anyone named Marcus, the name I'd seen flash across her phone once, weeks ago. It had been accompanied by a red heart. I remembered that small, stupid detail. Tom frowned. Yeah, Marcus worked a consulting project with Claire's team last year. Bit of a smooth talker. Not a bad guy, but flashy. Flashy. I didn't say anything more. Just thanked him and left. The puzzle was starting to fill in. Sunday afternoon, we were invited to a small neighborhood gathering. Just a handful of people, nothing fancy. Claire seemed completely at ease, chatting with neighbors, laughing with the kids. If I hadn't seen what I had, I would have believed every word, every smile. But I was noticing things now, like how her phone never left her side, like how she responded to a message and smiled at it mid-conversation, like how she avoided making plans for the following Friday. After the gathering, I stayed behind to help clean up. Grace, the neighbor who'd hesitated when I first brought up Claire, Came over while I was carrying trash bags to the curb. She seems happy, Grace said, nodding toward Claire, who was down the block talking to someone. She does, I said. You still think she's going through something? Grace looked at me carefully. Michael, you ever talk to Henry, the neighbor behind you? I nodded slowly. He's not crazy, you know, she said. He pays attention. Too much, maybe, but he's rarely wrong. You think he's right about Claire? Grace didn't answer directly. He told me something months ago. Said he saw your wife being picked up in a car while you were at work. I didn't want to believe it. Still don't. But he swears it's been happening for a while. That lined up with everything else. Her Friday stories, her time off work, the early departures. It was all real. And yet somehow, it still didn't feel like it could be happening to me. I went home that night and sat in the living room in the dark. Claire came in, found me sitting there, and asked if something was wrong. I looked at her. This woman I'd loved, lived with, trusted. She still wore the same perfume, still said the same things. No, I said. Just tired. She smiled, kissed my forehead, and went upstairs. And I stayed there in the dark, thinking about how much someone could hide behind a smile. It's funny how secrets rarely stay where they're buried. You try to keep everything quiet, clean lines, no confrontation, but the moment you stir the dust, voices begin to rise. Some louder than others, some barely whispers, but all of them point in the same direction. The following week, I started calling people. Not investigators, just people who had reason to cross Claire's path. People who might talk if approached gently. I wasn't hunting for scandal. I was building a timeline. First was Linda, Claire's cousin. We'd never been close, but she was one of the few family members who never sugarcoated things. Is Claire okay? I asked her during a casual check-in call. Linda paused. Why do you ask? She's been different lately. Another pause. Then she said, she told me you were getting distant, that maybe you were going through something. That again, the same narrative Claire's mother offered. She was setting the groundwork, planting the same story in different ears. I pushed a little. She ever talked to you about someone named Marcus? Linda was silent for a moment too long. That name sounds familiar, she said carefully. Why? I changed the subject. But now I knew. Claire had mentioned him to her cousin. Maybe not directly. Maybe not romantically. But enough that Linda remembered the name and froze when I brought it up. Later that day, I ran into Jeremy, one of our neighbors from down the street. He'd always been friendly, but not nosy. We ended up talking about lawn care, of all things, until I brought up Claire's volunteering. She mentioned the animal shelter to you? I asked offhand. Jeremy nodded slowly. Yeah, said it's been good for her, getting some time to reflect. She ever mention who else volunteers there? He thought about it. No, but she once said someone from the office joined her a few times. Sounded like a guy. Claire never mentioned anyone from work volunteering with her. She barely talked about the shelter, other than the fictional puppy she'd invented for me. That evening, I got a call from Elaine. I've been thinking, she said without pleasantries, about what you told me. And talked to someone I know who used to work with Claire. Said she got close with a consultant during that project last year. A guy named Marcus. Sounded like more than just co-workers. The circle was closing. Every trail led to Marcus. Every person she spoke to remembered his name. Yet he never appeared in any of Claire's stories to me. That Friday, Claire left again, same time. Same script. This time, I didn't go out. I sat in the kitchen with a notepad and started writing everything I knew. Dates. Names. Times she left early. Times she returned. People she claimed to see, cross-referenced with what I now knew were lies. No cameras. No apps. No tracking. Just people. Just the truth they didn't mean to reveal. When she returned that evening, she was glowing. Not euphoric, but light. Like a weight had been lifted. She walked past me in the kitchen, smiled, and said, I grabbed your favorite coffee on the way home. It sat untouched on the counter as I watched her go upstairs. The next morning, Henry waved to me over the fence. No words this time. Just a long, deliberate look. He knew I'd seen enough. And I had. But I wasn't ready to act. Not yet. Something still didn't make sense. Why would she risk so much, yet be so careful, so smooth? Unless she thought I'd never question her. For days, I kept playing a mental game of spot the lie. Claire was meticulous. Her lies were never loud. They whispered through half-truths and omissions. She gave just enough detail to appear open, yet never enough to be vulnerable. That's the art of deception, I suppose. Not in what is said, but in what's left unsaid. Monday evening, she made pasta from scratch. A rare occasion, one reserved for anniversaries or when she felt especially grateful. I watched her hands knead dough and wondered if guilt had a taste, whether it lingered in the sauce she stirred so carefully. "Long day?" she asked, smiling. "Not bad," I said. "You?" She hesitated. "Just the usual." The usual. For Claire, that meant nothing concrete. A haze of yoga, errands, shelter visits, and the occasional dinner with friends who'd recently started admitting they hadn't seen her in weeks. I watched her that evening. Really watched. And the terrifying part wasn't what she was hiding. It was how convincingly she wore the face of someone who wasn't. She told a story about a dog at the shelter, a Labrador who kept escaping his kennel. She laughed, said he reminded her of me when we first met. It was sweet, nostalgic even, but I had already spoken to the volunteer coordinator again. There was no Labrador, and Claire hadn't been there for a month. The next day, I went to see Linda again. I needed to press, to stop pretending this was a polite curiosity. "I need the truth," I told her. "Don't protect her. Just tell me if she ever mentioned being unhappy. Or Marcus." Linda sighed. She said she felt unseen, that she gave everything and got nothing back. That Marcus listened. I nodded. That much I could believe. I'd been distant lately. Not cruel, just distracted. Work, stress, routine. It doesn't excuse her, but it gave me clarity. The affair wasn't random. It was the outcome of seeds planted in the quiet. But it still didn't answer one thing. Why she was so sure she wouldn't get caught. That evening, I asked her casually, "You ever talk to Marcus anymore? From that project?" She blinked, caught off guard. "Marcus? No. Why?" "Just came up in conversation at work." She smiled quickly, brushing her hair behind her ear. "He was nice, but we didn't stay in touch." A lie. A fast, smooth lie. And it made something click. Claire wasn't just hiding an affair. She was rewriting our story, casting herself as the ignored wife, the misunderstood partner. And she was doing it skillfully, planting that version in the minds of everyone close to us. So when the truth finally surfaced, she'd already have sympathy. She was playing the long game. That night, I sat at the dining table after she'd gone to bed. I reviewed everything. Each conversation, each inconsistency, every time a name or date didn't match. A pattern was forming, not just of betrayal, but of strategy. This wasn't emotional recklessness. This was calculated. She believed I wouldn't notice, wouldn't ask, wouldn't fight back. And for a while, she was right. Until Henry leaned over the fence. Until the story she built started to crumble. Not from anything I did, but from everyone around her who talked without realizing they were breaking her illusion. I didn't know what I was going to do next. Not yet. But I knew this. I wouldn't confront her with rage. I wouldn't explode or accuse. I would do what she never expected. I would outthink her. By now, everything Claire said to me passed through a filter in my mind. A quiet translator that dissected each word, each pause, each sidelong glance. And what I found beneath the surface wasn't always a lie. Sometimes it was worse. It was a truth carefully framed to mislead. The following Wednesday, we attended a dinner at her friend Megan's house. Claire insisted we go, said it would be good for us. I agreed, mostly out of curiosity. Megan had been one of Claire's closest confidants. If anyone had been fed Claire's version of our marriage, it was her. Over dinner, Megan asked how our little rough patch was going. Her tone was gentle, even concerned. Claire laughed softly, touched my hand, and said, "We're getting through it. Michael's been more present lately." Megan smiled. "It shows. You two seem balanced again." Balanced. The word stuck in my mind like a thorn. Claire leaned into the image with ease, smiling, doting, nudging me affectionately. I played my part. But under the table, my hand was clenched into a fist. After dinner, Megan and I had a brief moment alone while Claire helped clean up. "I'm glad you're working things out," Megan said quietly. "She told you we weren't." She nodded. "She said you'd been distant, that you hardly talked anymore." I looked at her, steady. "Did she tell you why she thought that was?" Megan hesitated. "She hinted that she felt overlooked, that someone else was paying more attention." "Marcus," I said. Megan's eyes widened slightly. "She didn't name him," she said. "But I figured it out. Claire said it was never physical, just emotional." Of course. That's how it starts. That's the way people excuse themselves before they cross the line. "I'm not angry at her," Megan added. She seemed lost. Lost. That was the word Claire needed people to use. Not selfish, not dishonest. Just lost. It made everything forgivable. On the drive home, Claire was relaxed, humming quietly. She asked if I had a good time. I told her yes. She smiled and looked out the window, unaware of how much I now knew. Back at home, I went into the garage and stood for a long time among the tools, boxes, forgotten projects. Everything here was real, tangible. It didn't lie. I found a box of old photos, Claire and me in Italy, laughing over espresso. Her smile in those pictures wasn't careful. It was genuine. That was the hardest part. Not the betrayal, but the loss of something that once felt real. The next morning, I went for a walk before sunrise. I found Henry outside, sipping coffee on his porch. He didn't say anything, just raised his mug in acknowledgement. I walked over. "You knew before I did," I said. He didn't pretend otherwise. "I've lived on this street 20 years, he said. "You notice things. Patterns. You learn to read people when you've got no one to distract you. You ever think of telling her I knew?" Henry looked at me carefully. "Wouldn't have changed anything. She'd deny it. Gaslight you. You had to see it on your own." He was right. Claire hadn't just betrayed our vows. She'd shaped the battlefield before I ever stepped onto it. Planted stories, earned sympathy, crafted a narrative where I was absent and she was the one surviving. But the cracks were visible now. Her foundation, so carefully built, was starting to split. And I had no intention of warning her. By the end of that week, I no longer needed proof. I had no desire to confront her with photos, texts, or dramatic outbursts. What I wanted was understanding, not of her motives, but of how deeply she'd built this second life. I needed to see how far the rot had spread before I decided where to cut. I took a quiet approach. Not questions, not pressure, just silence. Claire didn't seem to notice. If anything, she mistook my calm for acceptance. She kissed me more, touched my arm in conversation, offered up laughter too easily. That's the thing about liars. They grow confident when unchallenged. They start slipping. Saturday, we went to a small local gallery exhibit. Claire loved these things, always pretending to study the brushstrokes while mostly people watching. That night, she wore a red dress she hadn't worn in over a year. She didn't wear it for me. I knew that now. She wore it for the version of herself she believed she was when she felt desired. While she spoke to an artist, I stepped aside and ended up beside a man named Peter, another neighborhood fixture I only knew in passing. He struck up conversation about the gallery, but it drifted elsewhere fast. "Your wife," he said after a while. "She's the one who volunteers at St. Elm's, right?" "That's what she says." Peter paused. "Funny. I help fundraise for them. Haven't seen her name on the roster since spring." Another piece. Later that evening, Claire sat across from me on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, sipping wine. She looked content, and for the first time, I felt a deep, strange pity. Not anger. Just the quiet realization that I didn't know the woman in front of me anymore. Maybe I never fully had. "You've been different lately," she said, peering over the rim of her glass. "In a good way." "Have I?" I said. "You're calm. Kind. Like you're seeing me again." I nodded slightly. "Maybe I am." She leaned forward, her voice softening. "I think things are getting better between us." I didn't respond. That night, I sat alone in my office and reviewed everything. It wasn't a list of sins, it was a map. Each falsehood, each redirected story, each person who had quietly confirmed what Claire denied. They were the final pieces of a larger image. One that showed not just infidelity, but intent, preparation, control. I looked back at the last 12 years of marriage and saw two timelines forming in parallel. The one I lived in, and the one she had been crafting behind the scenes. Not just with Marcus, but with everyone she'd subtly manipulated. Friends, family, even me. The picture was complete, and it all led to Friday. I was ready. Friday came, and with it, the final act. Claire left the house at 4:55 p.m. A little earlier than usual, but not suspiciously so. She kissed me lightly on the cheek, smiled as if nothing in the world was wrong, and said, "I'll bring back dinner. Tie okay?" "Perfect," I replied. She walked out the door like she always did, keys jingling, purse over her shoulder. Same calm, same practiced ease. I watched from the window, just out of view. At 5:02, a silver sedan pulled up. Same one I'd seen before. She got in without hesitation. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. Instead, I made a call to someone who had been waiting for it. You see, there was one person I hadn't mentioned until now. One person whose role I kept close, even from myself, Elaine. My sister. The one who told me to start listening. Weeks ago, I had told her everything. Every inconsistency. Every piece of the web Claire had spun. And she had done something I didn't ask for. She'd reached out to someone. His name was Marcus. She'd found him through a mutual contact in her social circle. One of those improbable connections that only seem to happen when you're looking for nothing in particular. It turned out Marcus had a reputation. He had a pattern. And most importantly, he had no idea Claire was married. She'd told him I was a controlling ex. That we still lived together for financial reasons. That she was trying to leave me, but I made it difficult. And he believed her. Until Elaine contacted him. They met for coffee. She showed him pictures. Told him about the house, the life, the timeline that didn't add up. Marcus, stunned, humiliated, cut contact that very day. No drama. No shouting. Just silence. But he'd already told Elaine everything. Dates. Texts. Trips. Even the hotel name they frequented. He didn't try to save face. He didn't even blame her. He just said, I didn't know. I swear. That's why Claire had been different lately. That's why she'd been trying to reconnect. Because Marcus had vanished 3 weeks ago, and she hadn't told me. She couldn't. She didn't know I knew. So when she left the house that Friday, she wasn't going to see Marcus. She was going to his old apartment, again, hoping he'd finally respond. Still chasing a version of herself that was slipping out of reach. At 6:30 p.m., she returned. Thai takeout in hand. Quiet. Off. I asked if everything was okay. She smiled. Just a long wait at the restaurant. Another lie. We sat across from each other, eating noodles and spring rolls, the air between us thinner than ever. She asked about my day. I told her it was peaceful. She smiled again, but it was strained. Her appetite was gone. I think I'm going to lie down, she said. I nodded. I'll join you soon. She went upstairs. I sat at the table a little longer, staring at the empty chair across from me. I had no need to confront her now. No reason to break the silence. She was already living inside a collapse she hadn't realized had started. The betrayal wasn't the worst part. It was the confidence, the arrogance, that she could shape the narrative so perfectly I'd never see the edges unravel. But I had. All of them. And the man she thought would replace me? He had already left her in the dust. There's a peculiar peace that comes after betrayal. Not forgiveness. Not understanding. Just the stillness that comes when the worst has already happened and all that's left is decision. Claire moved through the house as though nothing had changed. She was more attentive than ever, ironing my shirts, sending midday texts, touching my arm when she passed me in the hallway. But I could sense the unease beneath her movements. Marcus wasn't responding. Her plan was crumbling. She thought I was unaware, still in the dark. But her control was slipping. And I was calm. Because now it was my move. That Saturday morning, I went through the house and quietly packed away my most essential belongings, documents, personal files, heirlooms, and a few keepsakes that mattered only to me. I stored them in my office closet behind a locked cabinet. Claire didn't notice. She was in the kitchen baking banana bread, humming a tune she hadn't hummed in years. Something from the early days of our marriage. Nostalgic camouflage. I'm thinking we should go away soon, she said. Just us. A weekend in the mountains, maybe? Sounds nice, I said. I had no intention of going anywhere with her. But I wasn't going to tip my hand. That afternoon, I met with my lawyer. We'd spoken weeks before, but now I gave him everything. The timeline, the testimonies, the map of deceit I'd pieced together with meticulous care. No recordings, no photos. Just the human voices that corroborated a story so coherent it left no room for denial. Do you want confrontation? He asked. No, I said. I want clarity. Clean lines. No theatrics. He nodded. Then we'll file discreetly. Serve her in person. At home. No. Work. It was the last place she thought I had reached. She believed that part of her life was still sealed away. That the version of her who wore business heels and carried sleek leather bags remained untouchable. That was where the lie would unravel. Monday came. Claire dressed a little more carefully than usual, choosing a navy blue blazer and a touch of perfume I hadn't smelled in months. She kissed me before leaving. I'll try to be back early, she said. I smiled. I'll be here. She walked out the door with the same confidence that had shielded her for months. At 10:14 a.m., she was served. I didn't see her face when it happened. I didn't want to. I imagined it was composed at first, then confused, then pale. She would read the pages, see the citations, recognize the names, realize that the man she thought blind had seen everything. And when she came home that evening, she was quiet. She put her keys on the counter, removed her shoes, stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the hallway like someone trying to decide where to sit in a room that no longer belonged to them. I waited. She finally spoke. "You knew?" I nodded. "I did." Her shoulders slumped. For the first time in all the months of this unraveling, she looked small. Not in guilt, not in fear, just in the way someone looks when they realize the performance is over. "I didn't know how to stop," she whispered. "You didn't want to," I said. She didn't argue. We stood in silence for a long while. The house felt too large for two people and too quiet for anything else to matter. There were no shouting matches, no sobbing confessions, just the silence of two people who had played their parts to the end. She left the kitchen and went upstairs. I stayed at the table, sipping coffee that had gone cold long before. The house was quiet for days. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that lingers like smoke after a fire. Claire stayed in the guest room. She didn't ask questions, didn't cry. She simply moved like someone waiting for instructions, unsure of which direction was safe anymore. I didn't offer her any. The paperwork had been served. The process had begun. There was no going back. But I wasn't interested in revenge. I'd already passed through that phase, burned through the what-ifs and the why-me's. What remained now was structure, an exit that preserved dignity, at least on my side of the line. Claire eventually asked if we could talk. I agreed, not out of obligation, but out of finality. We sat in the living room. She looked smaller than I remembered her. Or maybe I'd just stopped seeing her through the lens of love. "I'm not going to fight the divorce," she said. "I know. She trailed off. "I didn't expect you to do it like this. You never said a word. You never gave me a reason to," I replied. She didn't respond right away, just nodded, eyes low. "Did you ever love me?" I asked, not to wound, but because I genuinely didn't know anymore. "I did," she whispered. "I still do. But I loved how it felt to be seen by someone new." There it was, the clearest thing she'd said since it all began. Claire didn't fall out of love. She fell into another version of herself, one where she wasn't just a wife, but something more, admired, pursued, reinvented. And Marcus, whoever he really was, gave her that mirror, until it shattered. "I don't hate you," I told her. She blinked, startled. "You don't?" "No, but I can't share a life with someone I can't trust. That version of us is gone." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Maybe she knew they wouldn't change anything now. In the weeks that followed, the logistics played out. Lawyers exchanged documents. Bank accounts were divided, schedules set. Claire moved out quietly, without spectacle. Just a moving van, a few boxes, a final nod goodbye. No embraces. No promises to keep in touch. The day she left, I stood at the window as the van pulled away. I expected to feel something. Anger, sorrow, relief. But what I felt was stillness. Not numb. Just done. I kept the house. Not because I needed it, but because I wanted it to mean something new. Something mine. I started small. Painting walls, replacing furniture, clearing out every trace of the double life that had once been staged here. Henry waved to me over the fence a few days later. "You good?" he asked. "I am now," I said. He nodded and went back to his garden. He never asked for thanks, never gloated. Just quietly watched the world unfold, like he always did. People around the neighborhood began to notice Claire was gone. A few asked. I told them the truth, just not all of it. Some things didn't need to be shared. The important part was that the lie had ended. And in its place, I had something better, clarity. A life no longer suspended in uncertainty. I found strength not in confrontation, but in patience, in listening, in watching, in choosing when to speak and when to act. This wasn't the ending I had imagined when I married her, but it was the one I owned, fully and without regret. It's in how confidently someone believes you'll never notice. And sometimes, the quietest men are the ones who see everything and wait until it matters to make their move.